Today I'm going to be showing you some dodge and burn techniques. I'm not going to go through every single option out there. I'm just going to show you what I personally use in my workflow, and also a couple of tips as to how to correct some color problems that you sometimes get with dodge and burn. So we'll start off by looking at these two images here. Now, this is how I like to break down dodge and burn functions in my head. I see them as corrective, which is represented by the image on the left, and that is things like fixing uneven skin tones, blotchiness. It could be uneven tones in fabric, plastic, car paint, anything you like. It's more of a corrective, a fix, basically. And then on the right-hand side, I've got this sphere that represents enhancement, which we're going to think about as improving form and shape. So I like to think it's corrective and enhancement. And I'll show you an example of both here. So I'm going to talk more about the specific techniques on the next image example. But just for here, I'm going to just show you what I mean by corrective and enhancement in practical terms. So as you can see, on this corrective side image on the left, I've used this rendered cloud filter in Photoshop just to kind of dramatize what, a blotchy skin effect might look like. So patches of darker, lighter, and sort of mid-tone areas. And the idea behind this stage is I'm just dodging at the moment, so I'm selectively brightening areas up, lightening areas. So I'm just going in and imagining that this was sort of some patchy skin with areas of lighter and darker. And all the idea is between of this particular stage is just to try and even out the skin tone a little bit. You're not trying to get it completely the same uniform, otherwise it will just look too fake. And you can actually overdo dodge and burn this way, although it's fairly hard to do, but you can go too far and end up completely flattening areas of the face, for example, which you don't want to do. So as you can see, I'm just whizzing around here, just quickly, not spending too much time in one place. If I just turn that on and off, you'll see areas that I've dodged now to bring them up. And now I'm going to go and actually burn some of the areas that are slightly too bright, or that I think are slightly too bright. And hopefully this is just a demonstration of the principle of dodge and burn. It's not meant to be an exact representation, but it's just outlining the principle of the corrective dodge and burn, which is to try and create a more even appearance. So as you can see, with not much time at all, that's evened out the difference between the tonal range a lot. And if we blur this layer with a Gaussian blur, you can maybe get something that looks a little bit more natural, or you can just drop the opacity back. We'll go into the techniques in a moment, but that's the corrective dodge and burn. Now I'm going to create another layer quickly. And this is going to be the enhancement. So by enhancement, I mean we've got an image here that you can tell is kind of a sphere, but it's quite dull looking. We want to enhance it. So we're going to go into where the image is already catching the light, and we're going to be lightening that even more. So we're going to be dodging that area. And then we're then going to be burning, so darkening the areas of this object where the shadow is already falling. So we're not trying to put shadow where it wouldn't be. We're trying to enhance the shadow that's already there, enhance the highlight that's already there. And as a result, we make the object look a lot more 3D and just improve its form. So if I turn that on and off, you can see what a big difference that's made already. So they're the two principles of dodge and burn as I see it. So onto this example, more of a real world example here of a subject that's, if this was just a casual portrait or an informal editorial, you probably wouldn't have to do any kind of dodge and burn on it really, but I'm just going to show you the techniques now. The two main techniques I would use are curves adjustment layers And the second method is a soft light adjustment layer. So I'll go through those both with you now. So for the curves method, we're just going to create a curve, and I'm sure you've probably seen this done a lot, but I do have my own slight twist on it. So we're going to do this as the dodge curve, so to brighten the areas. But instead of pulling the curve up from the middle, like most people would show you, I'm going to actually take the black point here on the left, the bottom left corner, and I'm just going to drag it up a little bit of the way, and then I'm going to pull it up from the middle slightly as well. And by doing it this way, I find that it minimizes the amount of oversaturation that you get normally from dodging. And by dragging up the black point first, or at least primarily using the black point instead of just from the middle, it does minimize the saturation. So then I'm just going to press Command-I to invert that layer mask. And I'm going to call that dodge. And of course, we then create another curve adjustment layer. And for the burn, and I am just going to pull this down from the middle. I'm not going to change the black or the white point there. And I'll just invert that and call that burn. So select your brush tool, select white as your foreground colour, and pick a fairly low opacity or flow, whichever you like to use. I personally just use opacity for most dodge and burn because I just feel like it gives me too much, it gives me a lot of control. And if I use flow, even though it's a more organic way to work, I find that sometimes it's not precise enough, but whatever you're comfortable with. And before we start, we're just going to make the image black and white just so we can concentrate on the luminance and not the colour, not be influenced by the colour. So the best way to do this is to fill a blank layer with 50% grey and change the blend mode to colour. I'm not going to get into in this video why that's a superior option than just using a hue saturation or a black and white adjustment layer, but it just is a better option, and I will cover it in a separate video. But for the moment, trust me, if you want to make an image black and white temporarily, use this method and not the other two. Right, so I'm just going to look for areas here that would benefit from being a bit lighter on the image. So let me zoom out, because it's always a good idea to work as far zoomed out as you reasonably can to start with, to avoid working on small details that don't really matter. So things that are catching my eye at the moment is under her lips, we've got like a darker shadow area under her bottom lip on her chin. Below her nose, I can see this darker patch going across her top lip. Maybe some slight under eye bags. The crease on her cheek looks quite dark. We could probably do with lightening that up. And also there's a bit in between her collarbone here at the base of her neck. There's like a darker patch there. So I'm gonna work towards those. So with white as my foreground colour, I'm going to start under her bottom lip at this patch of this darker patch here. And it's just where the light's catching, or there's a shadow. And sometimes half of the work is, or half of the learning of dodge and burn is knowing where to actually dodge and burn in the first place, and also when to stop so you don't go too far. So, okay, I think that looks good to me at the moment. So I'm going to now move on to this patch under her nose on the top lip. And again, we're just brushing on a low opacity. We're just lightening this area. As you can see there. You don't want to go too far, because if the temptation is, and this is where if you're a beginner, you will probably struggle the most, is knowing when to stop. And you can easily flatten out areas of the face too much. So this is just a quick example. So I'm just going to show you where I've done there. So we've taken care of those two. Let's go to the cheeks. It's quite a heavy shadow on her cheek crease here, where the light is just not hitting it as well as on the other side, or maybe she's just got more of a pronounced cheekbone. So again, we're going to we're not going to try and eliminate that shadow completely, by no means, because we still want the features to look real, but we're just lightening it up, which will just make for a nice cleaner image at the end. dodge and burning to even out skin like this, especially lightening areas of darker patchy skin can have quite an effect of making the skin look clean and fresh and clean. So I'm just going to do a little bit there. I'm going to go down to the base of a neck, and I'll zoom out a little bit more for this just so we can see it a bit clearer. Again, I'm just going to lighten this area up slightly. I'm not suggesting that you should do this on all images of this type, but these are just areas that I can quickly demonstrate to you are the kind of things that I would start with. Okay? And maybe some little bit of attention to the under eye bags, which they're not actually that bad. And the benefit of dodge and burn instead of other methods of it's like skin smoothing, as tempting as it may be to use like some automatic skin smoothing software or functions, is they will not respect the freckles. And this model's got a lot of freckles, and they will be obliterated by any kind of automated skin smoothing. So with dodge and burn, it is more time consuming, more of a manual process, but it really lets you preserve the details that you do want to remain in the skin, such as freckles and other naturally occurring like beauty marks and things like that you definitely want to keep. Okay, so if I just turn our sort of black and white layer off at the moment, and let's do a before and after of the dodge. As you can see, just with those few little things, it's sort of cleaned up the face a little bit, and it's now just made it a lot of a fresher, more of a fresher look to the image. But of course, we haven't finished yet because we've got to go to our burn. Well, we don't have to, of course. You don't feel like you should have to do this on every image, but I'm just going to show you again. There's not much to do on this shot in terms of what I'd like to burn. There's a couple of bits at the side of her lip. Down here, right down the left-hand side of her lip, there's a slightly lighter patch where obviously the light's just catching it. And those kind of areas. And also on her cheek here, it might be really hard to see, especially on the YouTube video compression. But there's just a couple of areas that I'm just choosing to just even out by darkening them here, by burning them. Excuse me. And again, there's not really anything else I would really want to do to this shot as far as that's concerned. Okay, now I'm just going to group that on here, and I'm going to call it DB curves. So here's a little tip, and this is why I like the curves method a lot, because it's very flexible. If you can see, well, I'm not sure if you can on this image, but where I've dodged, and this can happen a lot, is some of the areas have got a little bit too saturated, which has definitely helped by how I've set the curve up. Because remember, when we first set this curve up, we used the black point to lighten it mostly instead of just the middle. And if I drag that black point back down, watch what happens to the crease. I don't know if you could see there, but it got more saturated, which is what you don't want. So although how we set the curve up is a great way to stop the areas that you've dodged and lightened getting oversaturated, if you do find that any of the areas that you've dodged and burned with a curve are too saturated or too desaturated, there's a really quick fix, which is just to create a hue saturation adjustment layer. Just clip it to either the dodge or the burn layer, whichever you like. And from there, you can just make an overall adjustment to the saturation based on where you've dodged. So I'm just going to crank this up just a lot, just so you can see it on the screen. As you can see, it's now affecting those areas, and you can find a nice balance if you want them to be a little bit more saturated. It's just a nice way to go in at the end and fix any of those problem colours that have been shifted by the dodge and burn process. And of course, you can do exactly the same thing to the burn curve. You can just clip a hue saturation adjustment layer to that and tweak the saturation as needs be. Right, so that's the corrective dodge and burn, or what I would call the corrective. Now we'll show you the enhancement. And for that, I'm going to actually use a different method. My second favourite method is soft light. So SL, soft light, dodge and burn. Now, most people would instinctively make a 50% grey layer for this first, but there really is absolutely no need. It works exactly the same without 50% grey layer. And it's just a step that I don't think is necessary, so I never do it. But just to prove to you that it basically does work exactly the same, I'm going to fill it with a 50% grey layer and change the blending mode to soft light. I'm going to take a black and white brush at full opacity, and this is just to show you that there's no difference between having a 50% grey layer or not. This is how most people would do it. If I draw down white, it'll lighten it. If I draw down black, it'll darken it. Okay, so let's select all. I'll delete that layer so there's nothing in there. There's no 50% grey. And I'm going to go back and do exactly the same. Paint white, paint black. And as you can see, it's an identical result with just the layer being set to soft light. So you don't need a 50% grey layer. You can just go straight onto the empty layer. But anyway, so what I'm going to do here is start off with white. So we're dodging in effect. Low opacity again, or flow. I'm just going to start painting up the nose here in an area where I can see the light is naturally hitting the face. And this is what you need to do. Apart from creative license purposes, you need to really stick to where the light is naturally hitting the subject. Otherwise, it can start to look very fake. So I'm just enhancing her cheeks there on a cheekbone, just lightening those up where the light's catching it. Maybe on the other side a little bit. Maybe on her chin. Now, there isn't really much light catching the middle of her chin at the moment, but I'm going to enhance that a little bit anyway, because there are some areas of her face where if you highlight and shadow certain areas, it will just give a more 3D look to the image. But we're only going to take it quite easy on that because the light doesn't really hit there. So we're going to go up to the forehead as well. In the middle of the forehead is generally a good place to add a little bit of dodging just to bring it out, because anything that's lighter is going to appear closer to the camera. Anything that's darker is going to be further away. So by using that to our advantage, we can make things look 3D, more three-dimensional. So now we've done some dodging to enhance the highlights. Now we're going to switch to black for our burn layer. And I'm now going to choose areas that I want to make darker. So we've highlighted the cheek where the light would hit the top of the cheekbone. And now with the black selected, I'm just going to darken slightly under that area. And this is going to have an effect of making the cheeks seem a little more three-dimensional. And it's also going to simulate sort of a highlighter and another kind of makeup looks where you can obviously enhance or try to enhance the shape of your face through makeup. We're just doing that digitally here through Photoshop. So don't worry if it looks a bit over the top at the moment, because we're going to deal with that soon. Another good area is on the forehead up here, where the head meets the hairline. Darken that, because we've lightened in the middle of the forehead, and now we're darkening around the outsides. And again, that's going to give more of a three-dimensional look. And maybe just under the model's jaw here, under the stretched jaw, just darken that down a little bit. You can also sometimes make the nose appear a bit slimmer by burning or darkening the outsides of the nose and then having the middle lighter. But again, you've got to be really subtle with that, otherwise it starts to look a little bit crazy. So that's too much. So what we can do now is either lower the opacity and or go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we're just going to smooth the transitions of those enhancements that we've made, which makes it look a lot more natural. So it's quite subtle, but I think it really will make a difference in making the facial features pop. And all we're going to do now is create a layer mask, and with black as my foreground colour, full 100% opacity, I'm now just going to brush away where it's spilt over into the hair, because we don't want the dodge and burn effects to influence the hair on this shot. It's only on the face where we want them. So we're just going to quickly mask out the spill from around the hair. And there we go. So that's an example of a basic enhancement. And again, there is a way to influence the color. If you've done this method, if you like the soft light method because it uses a single layer like I've done here, but you find it's affected the color too much as well, here's a little tip to fix that. Create a selective color adjustment layer, clip it to the soft light layer, make sure your mode is on absolute. And now, depending on if you choose whites or blacks, you can influence the color of the areas that you've either dodged or burned. So if, for example, I go on whites, after the fact, I can now change the color of the areas I've dodged. I'm going to do it very extreme now, just so you can see. If I drag the yellow slider right up, you can see the areas that I've dodged go very yellow. But this is useful in case areas that you've dodged or burnt have changed the skin color. Sometimes it can make it go too yellow. Sometimes it can make it go a bit too pink. And in those instances, you can non-destructively just clip a selective color to it and choose either whites or blacks. So blacks will be areas that we've burnt. So again, if I drag that down very extreme, just to show you the areas at the side of the forehead that we darkened or burnt earlier, we can tweak the color of those to maybe make them a bit more desirable. And that is it. That is basically how I would dodge and burn on a day-to-day basis. And I hope you found this useful. I know it wasn't a really comprehensive tutorial into every method because there are so many ways to do it. And there are so many techniques and methods that it really is a huge subject. But just to get you going with the fundamentals and to just see things how I would see them in my workflow, that is how I would do it. So I hope you found this helpful, but if you want to know any more about any of the specifics or you've got any questions, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And as usual, I'd really appreciate any like or subscribe that you think this video deserves to help me carry on making more content in the future. But that is it for now. I will see you in the next one.